The HOA president looked me dead in the eye that morning and said, "Your little pond is stealing water from the community," then handed me a fine for $50,000 and an order to destroy the place where I'd scattered my wife's ashes. That was the day I stopped playing defense and let Mother Nature handle justice her own way. Right now, if you drive through what used to be the Riverbend Meadows subdivision, you'll still see the watermark on the fancy stone mailboxes, the line where the flood reached when the storm came through. And I'll admit, a part of me felt something close to peace standing there watching the same woman who'd called me a criminal wade through waist-deep sewage in a silk business suit, while her white Lexus floated down the street like a lost yacht. My name's Eddie Lawson, though folks around here call me Pa Red, on account of the hair I used to have before stress turned it silver. I'm 54, a retired engineer, and after my wife Claire passed, I moved back to the old property my granddad built in the hills outside Boulder Creek, Colorado. It's been in our family since the early 60s, a few acres of pine forest, a hand-built cabin, and the spring-fed pond that kept the valley below from flooding every single year. That pond wasn't decoration. It was Granddad's masterpiece. He'd engineered a natural overflow system with limestone and clay that worked better than half the storm drains the county ever installed. Claire loved that place. Every spring, we'd toss wildflower petals across the water and sit in silence until the sun slipped behind the ridge. When she died, that's where I brought her ashes. I thought I'd spend the rest of my years tending to that pond and keeping her memory alive. Then along came Vivian Cross, the new HOA president. Picture a woman who smells like money and power platinum hair, designer suit heels sharp enough to stab a tire. She pulled up my gravel driveway, in her spotless white SUV stepped out like she owned the mountain, and said, "Mr. Lawson, we have a serious problem with your unauthorized water hoarding." I remember setting down my coffee and just staring at her. "Ma'am, I said that water's been running out of this spring since before your parents met." She flipped open her leather folder like she was slapping a warrant on me. "All properties within Riverbend Meadows must comply with the new water management regulations passed last quarter. You have 30 days to eliminate this installation or face penalties." "Eliminate," I repeated. "You mean drain my pond?" "That's correct. The community's water table is a shared resource, and your private reservoir is creating an imbalance." I wanted to laugh. That pond was the reason her multi-million-dollar homes didn't have swimming pools in their basements every spring. But she wasn't there to talk logic. She was there to stake a claim. Later I found out her husband, a city councilman named Rick Cross, had pushed through those new HOA rules during an emergency session when half the residents were out of town. And wouldn't you know it, the only property excluded from the grandfather clause was mine. Their company, Silver Line Developments, had already drawn up plans for a luxury condo complex called Spring Crest Village, and guess whose land and water rights stood in their way? I tried reasoning with her. "Ma'am, that pond's part of a natural flood system. You drain it, you're gonna regret it next storm season." Vivian's smile didn't even twitch. "Then you'll have the pleasure of saying you told me so," she said, and turned back toward her SUV. 2 days later, I had an official notice taped to my door, $5,000 for unauthorized water use plus a threat of property seizure if I didn't comply. The local paper ran a story titled, "Veteran Hoards Water While Neighbors Face Drought." Bob. The photo they used made my pond look like a swamp. Folks I'd known for decades stopped waving. That night, I sat by the fire with Claire's old scarf in my hands, and I swear I could almost hear her voice. "You've spent your life fixing things, Eddie. Maybe it's time to fix this." So I did what any engineer worth his degree would do, and I started collecting data. First thing I did was drive to the county records office. The clerk there, a young guy with more attitude than experience, said it'd take weeks to pull my grandfather's deeds. I smiled, slipped him a coffee gift card, and got the files in an hour. Turns out my land came with HOA perpetual spring and mineral rights, dated 1963, meaning every drop of that water was legally mine. Next, I called an old Army buddy, Tom Granger, now an environmental lawyer. He laughed when he saw the documents. Read they picked the wrong guy. Those rights are bulletproof. But it wasn't just about law, it was about power. And Vivian had plenty. Within a month, she sent her inspector a nervous kid named Calvin, who showed up in a beat-up sedan and tried to act official while measuring my pond with a wooden yardstick. He claimed to represent the state's Water Management Bureau, but when I called to verify, they'd never heard of him. I watched him dump a bucket of something murky into my pond, then take photos like he'd just discovered a crime scene. I didn't confront him, I just smiled for the camera. That night, my trail cameras caught him sneaking back with a flashlight and a bag that clinked like empty bottles. When he left, I checked the shoreline, half a dozen dead fish floating in the water. He was planting evidence. That was my breaking point. I called Tom, sent him the footage, and said, "Time to go nuclear." He laughed again, but this time it wasn't humor, it was disbelief. "Buddy, you're sitting on federal infrastructure. That pond's part of a flood mitigation system listed in an old Army Corps survey. If they mess with it, they're messing with federal property." We formed a small alliance, me, Tom, my neighbor, Frank and his wife May, and an investigative journalist named Nora, who'd been digging into HOA corruption across the state. We started filing counterclaims, sending certified letters demanding audits. And the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Bribed inspectors laundered HOA funds, fake permits funneled straight to Silverline Developments. When Vivian realized we were closing in, she panicked. First came the harassment, anonymous letters calling me a water thief, power outages that lasted days, 2 security goons parking outside my fence pretending to monitor compliance. Then one morning, a sheriff's deputy showed up with 3 pump trucks and a court order to drain my pond due to immediate public health risk. I stood on the porch watching diesel fumes rise against the morning fog. "Deputy," I said calmly, "you realize this is federal flood control infrastructure, right?" He looked embarrassed. "I'm just following the order, sir." "Sure," I said, "and gravity's just following physics. They drained it anyway." I didn't fight. Not yet. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, while 60 years of clean spring water vanished down steel hoses. Vivian smiled from the road, like a queen watching an execution. What she didn't know was that the forecast predicted a 3-day storm system heading straight for Riverbend. When the rain came, it didn't drizzle, it dumped. Sheets of water hammered the hills, thunder rolling like artillery. By the second night, the storm drains in her neighborhood started backing up. By the third, her $1-million lawns had turned into swamps. At dawn, the news vans showed up, floods across the lower subdivision basements under 4 feet of water. I walked down the hill in my raincoat, nodded to a cameraman, and said, "Funny thing about physics. Water doesn't care about bylaws." Vivian was there screaming orders at city workers, soaked to the bone, mascara running down her face. She saw me and shouted, "This is your fault, I just pointed to the sky." "No, ma'am. That's your signature on the drain order." The Army Corps arrived the next day, armed with federal badges and clipboards. By week's end, both Vivian and her husband were under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and tampering with federal flood systems. The HOA dissolved faster than her waterproof mascara. It took us months to rebuild the pond, but when we did, the whole town showed up to help old neighbors, even some of the new folks who'd believed her lies. We turned the area into a protected community wetland, planted native reeds, built walking trails. The county even approved a scholarship fund in Claire's name for environmental engineering students. Some evenings I still sit by the water, coffee in hand, listening to the frogs sing. I think about how fast greed can twist something pure, and how sometimes you don't need revenge. You just need patience, because water always finds its level. So tell me, if your HOA tried to erase your family's history for profit, what would you do? Would you fight back? Or let nature do the teaching? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm real curious where you stand on this one.